Jesus' parable of the workers in the field is one of those parables that we all think we know exactly what it means. The landowner, we confidently explain, represents God, and we are the workers in some sense. The money that is paid at the end of the day represents how God gives us salvation or some other spiritual gift. That is what the parable means. And we go on and interpret the parable and apply it to our lives within that sort of matrix. But what if we're wrong? I mean, Jesus never says that that is how we are supposed to read the parable. All Jesus says is, for the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he goes on to describe this whole scenario. And it's up to us to figure out how what happens in the story is like the kingdom of heaven. And I've got to tell you that some recent events that we have lived through have made me look at this parable in a new light. I have a new perspective. What if we are meant to find the kingdom of heaven someplace else in the story? The kingdom of heaven is like some business owners who went out early in the morning to hire laborers to work in their grocery stores. But you see, they had a problem. There was a crisis on in the society in the form of a deadly illness, and everything had been shut down to prevent transmission of that illness. And people had been given instructions for their own safety not to go out unless it was absolutely essential. But you see, these businesses dealt with essential things. And so these owners had an extraordinary opportunity. If only they could manage to get what they had out to the people, well, they could make a ton of money. But, you see, they needed people to work in their stores and stock their shelves and collect the money and keep their customers, who were in a kind of fragile state, happy. And so they started out with the workers they already had, and they went to them and said, go and do the work you have always done and just be grateful that you can work when other people don't have jobs. And we will pay you what we have always contracted with you to pay. And let me tell you that over the following weeks, these business owners just cleaned up. People flooded into their stores, and many of them bought up insane quantities of their products. I mean, people were literally fighting with each other to pay exorbitant prices to buy more toilet paper than they would probably need for an entire year. And the profits came rolling in, and the owners were laughing all the way to the bank. But there was a problem. Because, you see, they couldn't do any of this without these laborers who worked in their stores. And in order to not miss out on more profits, they actually needed more workers to keep things functioning and to fill a growing backlog of online orders. But the problem was that this message that people should be grateful to have work when others didn't wasn't quite working so well anymore. You see, the workers were noticing things. They were noticing, for example, that some people who were not considered to be essential workers were actually being paid to stay home and keep the community safe from the virus. And they were being given an amount of money that was considered to be enough to live on. You might call it a basic income. And those people who were staying home were being paid more or less the same as these essential workers. And what's more, these laborers were becoming more and more aware that they were dealing with the actual dangers of working at such a time. Well, the owners weren't really risking much of anything. Well, they gathered in all the profits. So you can imagine that some of them were not feeling as if they should just be grateful to be paid anything. And so the owner said, let us make sure that everyone knows that these laborers of ours are heroic. Let us thank them and praise the workers. And the workers did appreciate being appreciated. And for a time, this did make things a little easier, made it easier to retain workers and even hire new ones. And so the profits were protected. But still, it was not enough. And the owner started to realize that there was more profit to be made, that they could get more if only they could manage to maintain and expand their operations. But for that, they needed to maintain and expand their workforce. But this was a little bit delicate because, you see, they did not want to let the workers know that they needed them. They liked it more when the workers felt like they were depending on the owners to give them their basic income, to give them what they needed to survive. So the owners came up with a plan. They would pay all of the workers more, yes, an extra $2 an hour, but they would be clear in their messaging. This was hazard pay. This was hero pay. And it was only because of the extraordinary risks of the situations. It was not because the owners needed the workers. No, it was because they were kind and generous. And they said, am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So for a while, the workers bore the burden of difficult days of the pandemic and the scorching heat of fear and anxiety that came with it, until the day came when it was over. What was over? Well, actually, it wasn't the crisis. The disease still raged on. The dangers of it spreading still existed. But suddenly, at some point, it was like everything changed. It was as if someone flicked off a switch. The owners decided that though the dangers still existed, the danger pay was no longer needed. You see, they understood. They understood that if they gave it to the laborers for too long, the laborers would stop seeing it as a special expression of generosity and start seeing it as something they had earned. And you couldn't have that. And so, though the profits were still up, thanks to the ongoing emergency and the hard work of the laborers, the emergency pay stopped. At the same time, it was like this idea of the heroism of the frontline workers got a lot weaker. And growing numbers of people were only too happy to take out their frustrations for how bad things were upon the frontline workers, and especially upon those who asked them to behave in responsible ways and do things like wear masks. It seemed that the laborers in the grocery stores ended up pretty much where they had been at the beginning. Now here is the question I would like to ask. Where in this story are we supposed to find the kingdom of heaven? The parable of the laborers in the field is a story that is very much steeped in the historical circumstances in which Jesus lived. Jesus lived in an agricultural society that had been founded actually with an ideal that every Israelite man should have a piece of land with which to support his own family. But by the time that Jesus came along, that ideal was no longer the case. And the land was increasingly consolidated into the hands of a few wealthy landowners, and huge numbers of people had been dispossessed from their lands. And this actually created a strange kind of dependence. The landowners, you see, had all this land, but they had no means to gather all of the produce of their lands. That's why this landowner in Jesus' story has a real problem. He has a field full of crops, and he desperately needs laborers to gather it for him, otherwise he's going to lose it all. The landowners needed the laborers. But you see, the system had been set up in such a way as to make sure that it was the laborers who were forced to be dependent on the landowners. This was because they had no security, and their only hope for survival was to be hired by a landowner. And in order to enhance this dependency, the landowners didn't offer stable employment. They would only hire people on a day-to-day basis. And for one day's hard work, a landless laborer was paid 1 denarius. The New Revised Standard Version of the Bible that we read from today translates 1 denarius as the usual daily wage, because it was the amount of money that was considered adequate for day-to-day survival. And I have long wondered why Jesus chose to tell this parable about a landowner who desperately needed workers to pick his crops before they rotted on the vine, and who foolishly did not hire enough workers at the beginning of the day to get the job done, presumably because he was cheap and trying to save a few denarii, and was forced to hire more workers as the day went on just to get the job done. I suspect that Jesus thought that it was only fair that the workers be paid enough money to live on, a usual daily wage. But Jesus may have even recognized that the landowner thought that he was being generous by paying all of his workers the full amount at the end of the day. But I can't help but wonder whether Jesus might have been saying something important about who was really dependent on whom and what generosity was really all about. So I take out this parable of Jesus from time to time, and I puzzle over it, trying to understand where Jesus was expecting to find the kingdom of heaven in it. And the more I think about it, the less I think that the landowner is supposed to represent God. In fact, he seems to be a perfect representation of how the world worked back then, and in many ways how it still works today. And as I say, recent events have given me some new perspective on this ancient parable. I mean, we have been on a wild ride over the last few months in our thinking about workers who do traditionally low-wage jobs. At first, it was as if we suddenly realized that these workers, who had always been there and to whom we had given little thought, were actually essential to our lives and our well-being. And yeah, we began to celebrate them and praise them. And yes, here in Ontario, some employers willingly gave them that extra boost in pay to represent how important we were all saying that they were. But now, 5 or 6 months later, got to ask, have we actually learned anything from this experience? I mean, it is stunning to see how quickly and how willingly we just went back to old attitudes. How discouraging to see any extra pay and benefits so quickly taken back. How discouraging to hear all the stories of grocery workers and other frontline workers putting up with abuse and disrespect. And yeah, I get that people are tired and their frustration and anger is coming out, but it's just not right. I do not know where Jesus expected us to find the kingdom of heaven in this story that he told. I do not know where he expects us to find the kingdom of heaven in the events of our own time. But I do know that his expectation of us is that we never cease to seek for it. And maybe Maybe the kingdom of heaven will be discovered when we wake up and open our eyes and just say, this is not right. And that those who own companies and stocks need to think about those who do their labor and to realize that all need to be treated with respect and that all sorts of work ought to be valued. I think that Jesus told this story in order to make the crowd realize how twisted the whole system was and how things could be different and maybe should be different. And he might have been saying that it is when we realize that we will truly discover the kingdom of God in this parable. Let's pray. Mighty God, sometimes the system of this world is just not right, and change is needed. And the things you said, Jesus, the parables you told, may have been pushing us to think along those lines as well. Help us to find the kingdom of God in our lives and in this world, and work for it wherever we may. Amen.